The old clock on the wall showed 6 in the evening when Thomas noticed the sky turning a strange shade of gray. He'd owned the Crossroads Diner for 15 years now, and he knew weather. This wasn't the light dusting of snow the forecast had promised. This was something else entirely. He wiped down the counter one more time, watching through the large front windows as the first snowflakes started to fall. They weren't the gentle, lazy flakes you see in Christmas movies. These came down hard and fast. Like someone up there had torn open a pillow factory. The diner sat right off Route 40, a major trucking route that cut through the heartland. On a normal evening, Thomas would see a steady stream of headlights rolling past, 18-wheelers hauling everything from furniture to frozen food across the country. Tonight, though, that stream was slowing to a trickle. His last few customers were local folks who lived in town. They gulped down their coffee, left their money on the tables, and hurried out to their cars. Everyone wanted to get home before the roads got bad. Thomas didn't blame them one bit. He was thinking about closing up early himself when he heard it. That deep, rumbling sound of a big rig downshifting. Then another. And another, one by one, massive 18-wheelers started pulling into his parking lot. The first was a red Peterbilt, its chrome gleaming even in the dimming light. Then came a blue Freightliner, a white Kenworth. They kept coming, these giants of the highway, parking wherever they could find space. Thomas watched as men climbed down from their cabs, hunching their shoulders against the wind that had suddenly kicked up. They came through the door in groups of 2 and 3, bringing gusts of cold air with them. Snow clung to their jackets and their boots left wet prints on the floor. "Coffee, please," said the first one through the door, a man with a salt and pepper beard and tired eyes. "And whatever you got that's hot." "Same here," said another, younger, maybe in his late 20s. They kept coming. Thomas counted them as they filed in. 10 drivers total. They spread out across the diner, some taking booths, others settling onto the red vinyl stools at the counter. The small restaurant, which could comfortably seat about 30 people, suddenly felt full and alive. Thomas got to work. Coffee first. Hot, strong, black coffee. He moved down the counter, filling cups, his hands steady despite the knot of worry forming in his stomach. Because he could see what was happening outside. And it wasn't good. In the 15 minutes since the first truck had pulled in, the snow had gone from light flurries to a full-blown assault. The wind was howling now, rattling the windows. Thomas could barely see across the parking lot to where the trucks sat like sleeping elephants, already getting covered in white. The small television mounted in the corner was tuned to the local news. The weatherman's face had that particular look of controlled panic that told Thomas everything he needed to know. This wasn't just bad. This was historic. "Folks, if you're just tuning in," the weatherman was saying, "we're looking at a rapidly intensifying blizzard system. What was supposed to be a minor snow event has turned into something we haven't seen in 30 years. We're now expecting 2 to 3 feet of accumulation, with wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. The diner went quiet. All 10 truckers were watching the screen now. "The Highway Patrol has just announced that Route 40 is now officially closed," the weatherman continued. "I repeat, Route 40 is closed indefinitely. If you're on the road, find shelter immediately." One of the younger drivers pulled out his phone and made a call. Thomas could hear bits of the conversation. "Yeah, I'm stuck." "No, I can't move." "I don't know, maybe tomorrow. Tell dispatch I'm sorry." Another driver was talking to what sounded like his wife. "I'm fine, honey. I'm safe. There's a diner here. Don't worry about me. You just make sure you and the kids stay warm." Thomas moved through the diner, topping off coffee cups, taking orders. These men were hungry. They'd been on the road for hours, some of them since before dawn. He fired up the grill, started cracking eggs, flipping burgers. The familiar routine calmed his nerves a little. The oldest of the truckers, a man who looked to be in his 60s with weathered hands and kind eyes, came up to the counter. "Listen," he said quietly, "we don't want to impose. Is there a motel nearby? Somewhere we could hunker down for the night?" Thomas shook his head. "Nearest one is 12 miles up the road." And even if you could get there in this, which I doubt, it's probably already full. The trucker nodded slowly, processing this. We'll figure something out. Worst case, we sleep in our cabs. In this cold? Thomas said, glancing at the thermometer outside the window. It was already down to 15 degrees and dropping fast. With wind like that, you'd freeze? The trucker didn't argue. They both knew it was true. Thomas looked around his diner. At these 10 strangers who'd been dealt a bad hand by Mother Nature, they were tired. They were worried about their jobs, their families, their deadlines. Some of them were probably scared, though none would admit it. He thought about his own situation. His wife had passed 2 years back, cancer. His kids had grown up and moved to other states, chasing better jobs in bigger cities. The diner was all he had. This building, this business, had been his whole life for 15 years. Outside, the storm was getting worse by the minute. The world was turning white, disappearing behind a wall of snow and wind. The temperature was plummeting. And here in his diner sat 10 men who needed help. Thomas made a decision right then. It wasn't a hard decision, really. In fact, it felt like the only decision he could make. He walked to the front door and turned the lock. Then he flipped the sign from open to closed. Every head in the diner turned to look at him. "Gentlemen," Thomas said, his voice carrying over the howl of the wind outside, "I hope you like pancakes. Because nobody's going anywhere tonight." The trucker stared at Thomas for a long moment. Nobody said anything? The only sound was the wind screaming outside and the sizzle of the grill behind the counter. Finally, the older trucker with the salt and pepper beard spoke up. "Sir, we can't let you do that. You've got to get home to your family. This storm isn't playing around." Thomas smiled, but there was sadness in it too. "This diner is my home," he said simply. "Has been for the past 2 years, pretty much. My wife passed and my kids are scattered all over the country. So tonight you guys are my family?" He could see the emotion on their faces. These were tough men who spent their lives alone on the road. But kindness had a way of breaking through those walls. "Besides," Thomas added, walking back behind the counter, "I've got enough food in this kitchen to feed half the county. Eggs, bacon, potatoes, flour for pancakes and biscuits. I was going to restock tomorrow anyway. Might as well put it to good use." One of the younger drivers, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, stood up. "At least let us pay you double. Triple even." Thomas waved him off. "Your money's no good tonight. Just sit down and relax. You're safe, you're warm, and that's what matters." The gratitude in the room was almost tangible. These men had been stressed, worried about where they'd sleep, how they'd survive the night. And now, thanks to a stranger's generosity, they could breathe easy. Thomas got back to cooking. He scrambled eggs by the dozen, fried up bacon until the whole diner smelled like breakfast, even though it was past 7 in the evening. He made hash browns, crispy on the outside and soft in the middle, just the way he'd learned from his grandmother 50 years ago. As the truckers ate, they started to talk. The older one introduced himself as Robert. He'd been driving trucks for 38 years since he was barely old enough to get his commercial license. "Seen a lot of storms in my time," he said, "but nothing quite like this. This one came out of nowhere." The young kid was Danny. This was only his 5th long-haul trip. He'd quit his job at a warehouse 3 months ago because he wanted to see the country, make decent money, be his own boss on the road. Now he was starting to wonder if he'd made a mistake. "My mom is going to kill me when she finds out I'm stuck in a blizzard," he said with a nervous laugh. There was Lise, a quiet man with gentle eyes who was hauling medical supplies to a hospital 3 states over. He kept checking his phone, worried about the delay. "People need these supplies," he kept saying. "They're counting on me." Robert put a hand on his shoulder. "Brother, you can't control the weather. The hospital knows that. Your dispatcher knows that. What matters is you're alive and safe. The supplies will get there when the storm passes." Another trucker, a woman named Beverly, who had short gray hair and arms strong from years of wrestling steering wheels, added her perspective. "I've been doing this for 22 years, she said. "Lost count of how many times I've been delayed by weather, by traffic, by mechanical problems. Any company worth working for understands. And if they don't, well, there's plenty of other companies out there. She was one of only 2 women in the group. The other was younger, maybe in her 30s, with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her name was Rachel, and she had 3 kids at home. Thomas could see her wedding ring catching the light as she wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "My youngest just turned 5, Rachel said, showing them pictures on her phone. She drew me a picture before I left. It's taped to my dashboard. Says, 'Come home safe, Mommy.'" "You'll get home safe," Thomas assured her, refilling her coffee. "Just not tonight. Tonight you're stuck with us." The hours passed. Thomas kept the food coming. Burgers, sandwiches, more eggs, and bacon. Every time someone's plate got low, he was there with more. The coffee pot never stopped brewing. He went through 3 full pots before 9 o'clock. The storm outside was relentless. Snow piled up against the windows. The wind shook the building so hard that the lights flickered a few times. Each time they did, everyone would go quiet, holding their breath. Praying the power would hold Dot around 9:30, Thomas noticed Danny looking anxious. The kid kept checking his phone, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. "You okay, son?" Thomas asked Dot. Danny looked up, embarrassed. "Yeah, I just ... I'm supposed to deliver this load by tomorrow morning. It's furniture for a store opening. If I'm late, they might not use our company again. And if that happens, my boss might fire me." The other truckers exchanged knowing looks. They'd all been there, felt that pressure. "Listen," said a trucker named Frank, a heavy-set man with a booming voice. "I've been fired 3 times in my career. Know what? I always found another job. Usually a better one. Any boss who would fire you over a blizzard is a boss you don't want to work for anyway." "Frank's right," Beverly chimed in. "We're in an industry that understands weather delays. This storm is on the news. It's hitting 5 states. Your boss knows you're not sitting in a parking lot eating donuts for fun." Thomas brought Danny a slice of pie. Apple, homemade, with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting on top. "On the house," he said. "And don't worry so much. You're young. You've got your whole career ahead of you. One storm won't define it." The kindness in the diner was contagious. The truckers started sharing their own stories. Robert talked about the time he broke down in the Arizona desert in the middle of summer, how a family stopped and gave him water and a ride to the nearest town. Luis shared how another driver had helped him change a tire in pouring rain somewhere in Tennessee. "This life," Robert said, gesturing around the table, "it can be lonely. We spend days, sometimes weeks, away from home. We sleep in our cabs, eat at rest stops, drive through the night while everyone else is asleep. But the thing about truckers is we look out for each other. We're a family, even if we've never met before." Around 10 o'clock, Thomas brought out a deck of cards from behind the counter. "Any of you play poker?" That sparked some energy. They pushed 2 tables together and set up a game. Nothing serious, just playing for spare change and bragging rights. Thomas dealt the first hand, and soon the diner was filled with laughter and friendly trash talk. Rachel told a story about the time she bluffed a table full of men out of a $50 pot at a truck stop in Nevada. Beverly shared how she'd learned to play from her father, who'd also been a trucker. The television in the corner continued its grim updates. 3 feet of snow now. Wind gusts hitting 70 miles per hour. Power outages across the region. Roads impassable. The governor had declared a state of emergency. But inside the Crossroads diner, there was warmth. There was laughter. There were people taking care of each other. Around 11, Thomas noticed Robert looking at him thoughtfully. The older trucker had folded his hand and was just watching Thomas move around the diner, checking on everyone, making sure coffee cups stayed full, that everyone had enough to eat. "You're a good man," Robert said quietly when Thomas came by. "What you're doing tonight, a lot of people wouldn't do it." Thomas shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just doing what's right, what anyone should do." "But not everyone does," Robert said. "That's the difference. You see people in need and you help." "No questions asked," No payment expected? In a world that feels like it's falling apart sometimes, people like you remind us that there's still good out there. Thomas felt his throat tighten. He wasn't used to this kind of appreciation. He'd always just lived his life, tried to be decent, tried to treat people the way his parents had taught him. My daddy used to say, Thomas said, that we're all just passing through this world. The only thing that matters when we're gone is how we treated people along the way. Robert nodded. Your daddy was a wise man. At midnight, the lights flickered one more time. Then they went out completely. The diner plunged into darkness. For a moment, there was just the sound of the wind and startled exclamations. Then Thomas's calm voice cut through the dark. Everyone stay seated. I've got flashlights. He moved through the darkness like he could see perfectly, his feet knowing every inch of his diner by heart. A moment later, light bloomed from behind the counter. Thomas emerged with an armload of flashlights and battery-powered lanterns. I've been through enough winters to know better than to trust the power company, he said with a chuckle. Passing out the lights, the diner took on a different atmosphere in the soft glow of lanterns. It felt cozier somehow, more intimate, like they were all camping together, sheltering from the storm. Good news is the stove is gas, Thomas said. So we'll still have hot food and coffee. We'll be just fine. And somehow, looking around at the faces lit by lantern light, everyone believed him. The lanterns cast dancing shadows on the walls of the diner. Outside, the blizzard raged on like an angry beast, but inside, something unexpected was happening. These 10 strangers were becoming something more. Thomas went back to the kitchen and fired up the gas stove. The blue flames looked almost magical in the darkness. He put on a fresh pot of coffee, the old-fashioned way, watching it percolate. The smell filled the diner, rich and comforting. You know what? Beverly said, breaking the quiet. I haven't sat still like this in months. Maybe years. I'm always rushing, always trying to make the next delivery, hit the next deadline. When's the last time any of us just sat and talked to people? There were nods around the room. It was true. The trucking life was a solitary one. Hours and hours alone with nothing but the road, the radio, and your own thoughts. My wife used to complain about that, Robert said softly. Said I was married to the road more than I was married to her. She wasn't wrong. He paused, staring into his coffee. She passed 3 years ago. Heart attack. I was somewhere in Oklahoma when I got the call. Didn't even make it home in time to say goodbye. The pain in his voice was raw, even after 3 years. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Nobody said anything for a moment. Sometimes silence is the best response to grief. Thomas brought over a fresh pot of coffee and refilled Robert's cup. My wife went 2 years back, he said quietly. Cancer. Had her for 6 months after the diagnosis, which the doctor said was a blessing. I closed the diner for those 6 months, stayed by her side every single day. I gotta say everything I needed to say. I got to hold her hand at the end. I'm sorry for your loss, Robert said. And I'm sorry for yours, Thomas replied. But you know what? I think they'd both be proud of us tonight. Taking care of people. That's what life's about, isn't it? Danny, the young trucker, had been quiet for a while. Now he spoke up, his voice uncertain. Can I ask you guys something? Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life? Frank, the heavy-set trucker with the booming voice, laughed. Every time I'm stuck in traffic on I-95, every time I have to sleep in a truck stop parking lot next to a refrigerated trailer that hums all night, every time I miss my daughter's birthday. But? Danny prompted. But then I get that moment, Frank continued, his voice turning thoughtful. Driving through the mountains at sunrise. Or making a delivery to a small-town store and seeing how happy the owner is that his shelves won't be empty. Or helping another driver on the side of the road. Those moments remind me why I do this. Lois, who'd been quiet most of the night, finally spoke up. I haul medical supplies, he said. Medications, equipment, sometimes organs for transplant. Every load I carry, I think about the person on the other end. The kid who needs insulin. The man waiting for a new kidney. I'm not just moving boxes. I'm saving lives. That's beautiful, man, Danny said, and he meant it. The conversation flowed like that for hours. They talked about the best truck stops in America, the worst roads they'd ever driven, the strangest things they'd hauled. Beverly told a story about transporting a circus elephant once. Frank talked about the time he accidentally delivered wedding cakes to a funeral home and funeral flowers to a wedding venue. "I've never driven so fast in my life," Frank said, laughing at the memory. Trying to swap those deliveries before anyone noticed. Made it with 10 minutes to spare. Thomas pulled out an old checkerboard from under the counter. "My grandfather and I used to play this every Sunday after church," he said, setting it up on the counter. "Anyone want a game?" Robert did. They played while the others watched and offered advice. Thomas won the first game. Robert won the second. They were in the middle of a tiebreaker when Rachel's phone rang. She looked at the screen and smiled. "It's my kids," she said, answering. "Hey, babies." "Yes, Mommy's safe. I'm in a nice warm diner with some new friends." "No, honey, the storm is too bad to drive in." "I know, I miss you too. Can you put Daddy on?" She talked to her husband for a few minutes, explaining the situation. Thomas could hear the relief in her voice. Her family knew she was okay. That was what mattered. When she hung up, she had tears in her eyes. "My 5-year-old said she was praying for me. She told God to keep the angels around Mommy's truck." Rachel wiped her eyes. "Kids, you know, they have such faith." "That prayer worked," Beverly said, gesturing around the diner. "Maybe Thomas here is one of those angels." Thomas felt his face grow warm. "I'm no angel. Trust me on that." "Could have fooled us," Danny said. The others murmured agreement. Around 2 a.m, Thomas realized some of the truckers were starting to fade. They'd been driving all day before the storm hit, and exhaustion was setting in. "Listen," he said. "I've got some booth cushions in the back storage room. They're clean, meant for reupholstering these seats. We can use them as makeshift mattresses. Won't be comfortable, but it's better than sleeping sitting up." Together, they arranged the cushions on the floor. Thomas brought out all the tablecloths he had, clean ones from the linen closet, to use as blankets. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I feel like we're having a slumber party," Danny joked. "The world's oldest slumber party," Frank added, groaning as he lowered himself onto a cushion. "My back is going to hate me tomorrow." But despite the less-than-ideal sleeping arrangements, there was something comforting about it. 10 people, plus Thomas, all together in the warm glow of the lanterns. The storm howled outside, but they were safe. They were together. Thomas made one more round with the coffee pot. Some declined, ready to try to sleep. Others accepted gratefully, not quite ready to call it a night. Robert was one of those still awake. He sat at the counter, nursing his coffee, watching Thomas clean up. "You didn't have to do all this," Robert said. "You could have sent us away." "Most people would have." Thomas shrugged. "Maybe, but I'm not most people. And neither are you. You all could have panicked when that storm hit. Could have tried to push through, risk your lives on that highway. But you made the smart choice. You pulled over. You kept yourselves safe." "Still," Robert persisted, "this kindness you've shown us tonight. In a world where people are so quick to judge based on how someone looks, where they're from, what they believe, you didn't ask us any of that. You just saw people who needed help." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "You want to know something? When I was a kid growing up in this town, there were people who didn't want my family here. We were one of only 3 black families in the whole county. I remember my daddy's store, how some folks would walk right past it to shop somewhere else. Anywhere else, just because of the color of his skin." Robert listened, his face somber. "But there were good people too," Thomas continued. "Like old Mr. Patterson, who owned the hardware store. When my daddy needed supplies to fix our roof and didn't have the money, Mr. Patterson let him pay over time. Never charged interest, never made him feel small about it. And Mrs. Chun, who ran the grocery. She always slipped extra candy into our bags when we'd come in." He smiled at the memory. "Those people taught me something important. Kindness doesn't see color. It doesn't see differences. It just sees people who need help, and it acts. That's what I'm doing tonight. Just passing on what was given to me. Robert nodded slowly. The world needs more people like you. The world needs more people like Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Chun, Thomas corrected. I'm just trying to be worthy of what they taught me. By 3 in the morning, the diner had finally gone quiet except for the sound of snoring and the wind outside. Thomas sat in a booth by the window, watching the snow fall in the beam of a flashlight he'd set on the table. The world outside was completely white now, transformed into something both beautiful and terrifying. He thought about his wife, wondered what she'd think of tonight. She'd probably laugh at him, running a free hotel out of the diner. But she'd be proud too. He knew that. Thomas closed his eyes just for a moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. They'd have to dig out. The truckers would need to get back on the road eventually. But tonight they were safe. Tonight they were family. And that was enough. Thomas woke to the sound of silence. That's what struck him first. The wind had stopped howling. The storm had finally passed. He sat up in the booth where he'd dozed off, his back stiff and his neck aching. The lanterns had burned low through the night, casting a dim orange glow across the diner. Around him, the truckers were still sleeping, some curled up on the cushions, others slumped in booths. He checked his watch. 6:30 in the morning. Outside the windows, the world had turned into something from a snow globe. Everything was buried under a thick blanket of white. The parking lot was invisible. The trucks looked like massive white hills. Even the highway was gone, swallowed up by the blizzard. Thomas stood slowly, his joints protesting. He wasn't as young as he used to be. He made his way to the window and just stared. In all his years in this town, he'd never seen this much snow. 3 feet, maybe more in the drifts. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Behind him, he heard movement. Robert was awake, stretching his arms over his head with a groan. Morning, Robert said, his voice rough with sleep. We make it through the night? We did, Thomas said. Storm's over. But look at this. Robert joined him at the window. His eyes went wide. Good Lord, that's going to take all day to clear. One by one, the other truckers woke up. They gathered at the windows, taking in the scene. Nobody said much at first. They were all thinking the same thing. Those trucks weren't going anywhere anytime soon. Danny looked like he might cry. My delivery. I'm so late. I'm definitely getting fired. Frank put a hand on the kid's shoulder. Easy there. Let's take it one step at a time. First thing is to call your dispatcher, explain the situation. Then we figure out the next move. The power was still out, but Thomas got the gas stove going again. Soon the smell of fresh coffee filled the diner, and he was cooking breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, the last of his bacon. He knew his supplies were running low, but he'd make it work. As the truckers ate, they started making phone calls. Calling dispatchers, calling families, trying to figure out when the roads would be clear. The news from their companies was mixed. Some were understanding, telling them to stay put and stay safe. Others were less sympathetic, worried about missed deliveries and angry customers. Lise, the quiet one who hauled medical supplies, was on the phone for a long time. When he finally hung up, he looked relieved. They're rerouting my load, he said. Getting it on another truck that's coming from the south? The hospital will get their supplies on time. See? Beverly said to Danny. Things work out. But Danny's call hadn't gone as well. His boss had been angry, threatening, saying this kind of delay was unacceptable. When the kid hung up, his hands were shaking. He said if I can't handle the job, maybe I should find something else. Danny said quietly. The other truckers exchanged looks. They'd all been there before? Bad bosses. Unreasonable demands. The pressure of an industry that never stopped moving. Listen to me, Robert said, his voice firm but kind. That man is a fool. You did everything right. You saw dangerous conditions and you pulled over. That's good judgment. That's what keeps you alive in this business. If he can't see that, then he doesn't deserve you as a driver. Robert's right, Rachel added. There are good companies out there. Companies that care about their drivers. You're young, you're learning. Don't let one bad boss make you think you're not cut out for this. Thomas brought Danny a plate of food. Eat, he said simply. Everything looks better on a full stomach. By mid-morning, they heard the distant sound of snowplows. The town was starting to dig itself out. Thomas turned on the battery-powered radio and they listened to the updates. Route 40 wouldn't be clear until late afternoon at the earliest. Maybe not until tomorrow. The truckers were getting restless now. Not in a bad way, but in that way people get when they're used to moving, used to being productive, and they're stuck sitting still. Tell you what, Frank said. When those plows get closer, we should help dig out. This man fed us, kept us warm all night. Least we can do is help clear his parking lot. The others agreed immediately. It felt good to have a purpose, a way to give back. Around noon, the power flickered back on. The lights seemed too bright after hours of lanterns. The TV buzzed back to life, and they could see the full extent of the storm's damage. Roads closed across 5 states. Thousands without power. But no deaths on Route 40. Everyone who'd been smart enough to pull over had survived. That includes us, Beverly said. Because of this man right here. Thomas felt embarrassed by all the attention. He'd just done what felt right. But looking at these faces, these people who'd been strangers yesterday and now felt like old friends, he understood what they were trying to tell him. His simple act of kindness had meant everything to them. By 2 in the afternoon. The plows were close enough that the truckers could start working on the parking lot. Thomas wanted to help, but they wouldn't let him. You cooked for us all night, Robert said. You earned a rest. Thomas watched from the window as these 10 truckers worked together. They had shovels from their trucks, emergency supplies they all carried. They dug out paths, helped each other clear snow from around the big rigs. They worked for hours, these men and women from different parts of the country, different backgrounds, different lives. But right now, they were a team. Danny worked right alongside Frank, the young kid keeping pace with the older man. Rachel and Beverly cleared snow from around the diner's entrance. Luz and Robert tackled the biggest drifts. They were sweating despite the cold, their breath coming out in white puffs. When they finally came back inside around 4 o'clock, they were exhausted but smiling. The parking lot wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough for the trucks to move. Thomas had hot coffee waiting for them and the last of his food. Sandwiches made from what remained in his refrigerator. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. The highway patrol says Route 40 should be open by evening, Robert said, checking his phone. Looks like we'll be able to head out soon. There was relief in his voice, but something else too. Sadness, maybe. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but they were all feeling it. This strange, unexpected night had created something special. And now it was ending. They ate slowly, nobody rushing. They swapped phone numbers, promised to stay in touch. Rachel made them all take a group photo outside by the trucks. Everyone crowded together, grinning despite the cold. For my kids, she said, I want to show them the angels who looked after their mommy during the storm. As the sun started to set, the trucks began firing up their engines one by one. The big diesels rumbled to life, ready to get back on the road. The truckers said their goodbyes to Thomas, each one shaking his hand or hugging him. Danny was the last to go. He shook Thomas's hand and said, I called my boss back. Told him I quit. You were right, all of you. Life's too short to work for people who don't value you. Good for you, son, Thomas said. You'll find something better. I already have 3 companies that want to interview me, Danny said with a grin. Turns out I'm not such a bad driver after all. Robert gave Thomas a long hug. You're going to be seeing us again, he said. That's a promise. Thomas didn't quite understand what he meant by that, but he nodded. You're welcome here anytime. One by one, the trucks pulled out of the parking lot, their lights cutting through the gathering darkness. Thomas stood outside in the cold, watching them go. The parking lot felt empty now. The diner felt empty. He went back inside and looked around. There were coffee cups to wash, floors to sweep, cushions to put away. The place was a mess. But it was the best kind of mess. The kind that comes from helping people, from opening your doors and your heart. Thomas started cleaning up, humming an old song his wife used to love. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. Because those 10 truckers were already making phone calls, sending messages, spreading the word about the man who'd saved them during the blizzard. The word was spreading across the highways, through truck stops and rest areas, on CB radios and in group chats. The story of the Crossroads Diner, and the man who'd asked for nothing and given everything. By the time Thomas locked up that night, exhausted but content, hundreds of truckers across the country had already heard the story, and many of them were planning a visit. Thomas woke up the next morning feeling every one of his 62 years. His back ached from sleeping in that booth. His feet were sore from being on them all night. But there was also something else. A warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. He'd helped people. Really helped them. And it felt good. He drove to the diner at his usual time, 6 in the morning. The roads were clear now, the plows having worked through the night. The town was slowly coming back to life. He pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a moment, looking at the space where 10 big rigs had been parked just yesterday. It felt like a dream now. Had it really happened? 10 strangers, a blizzard, a night of coffee and conversation and unexpected friendship. But the evidence was there. The parking lot still showed the marks where the trucks had been. Inside, there were coffee cups he'd missed, a forgotten glove on one of the tables. It had been real. Thomas unlocked the door and started his morning routine. Coffee first. Then he'd check inventory, see what needed ordering. The storm had wiped out most of his supplies. He'd need to restock before the lunch rush, except there probably wouldn't be a lunch rush today. The town was still digging out. Most people would stay home. It would be a slow day, which was fine. He could use the rest. At 7 o'clock. He flipped the sign to open and settled in behind the counter with his own cup of coffee and the newspaper. The storm was front-page news. Record snowfall. State of emergency. But everyone had pulled together, and the town had made it through. He was reading about the cleanup efforts when he heard it. That sound. The deep rumble of air brakes. Thomas looked up. A truck was pulling into his parking lot. A big blue Freightliner. His heart jumped a little. Maybe it was one of them, coming back to say hello, but then he heard another truck. And another. Thomas set down his coffee and walked to the window. His mouth fell open. Coming down Route 40 was a convoy of 18-wheelers like nothing he'd ever seen. 10 trucks, 20, he stopped counting at 30. They just kept coming, one after another, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun. They began pulling into his parking lot, filling every available space. When the lot was full, they lined up along the shoulder of the highway. Dozens and dozens of trucks, their engines rumbling like thunder. Thomas stepped outside into the cold morning air, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. Drivers were climbing down from their cabs. And right there in front was Robert, that kind-faced older trucker with the salt and pepper beard, walking toward him with the biggest smile Thomas had ever seen. "Morning." "My friend," Robert said, pulling Thomas into a bear hug. "Told you we'd be seeing you again." What is all this?" Thomas managed to say. "This," Robert said, gesturing at the sea of trucks and drivers gathering around them, "is the trucking community saying thank you." Beverly was there, and Rachel, and Lise and Frank, and Danny. All 10 of them had come back, but they'd brought friends. Lots of friends. "We started making calls as soon as we left," Rachel explained. "Telling people what you did for us. How you opened your diner, fed us, kept us safe, wouldn't take a dime for any of it." "Word spread fast," Frank added with his booming laugh. "Truck stops, CB radio, social media. By midnight, every trucker in 5 states knew about you." "We wanted to do something," Beverly said. "Something to show you what your kindness meant." The drivers started unloading their trucks. Cases and cases of supplies appeared. Premium coffee beans in large burlap sacks. Restaurant-quality pots and pans. A brand-new commercial refrigerator that had to be carried by 6 men. Boxes of dried goods, canned foods, spices, everything a diner could need. We all pitched in, Danny said. He looked different than he had 2 days ago. More confident. Some of us donated money. Others donated supplies. Everyone wanted to help. Thomas couldn't speak. He just watched as this army of truckers carried supplies into his diner, stacking them carefully, organizing them. They worked with the same teamwork they'd shown clearing snow. These strangers who'd become a family. A flatbed truck pulled up, and on it was lumber, shingles, tools. A tall man with calloused hands climbed down and introduced himself. Name's Pete. I heard your roof was leaking. I'm a carpenter when I'm not driving. Figured I could fix that for you. I can't accept all this, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, you can, Robert said firmly but kindly. You gave to us when we needed it. Now we're giving back. That's how this works. That's how community works. More trucks kept arriving. The parking lot was completely full now, and trucks lined both sides of the highway for a quarter-mile in each direction. Drivers Thomas had never met were shaking his hand, thanking him, sharing their own stories of times when strangers had helped them on the road. The townspeople started coming out to see what was happening. The mayor showed up, looking stunned at the scene. The local news van pulled in, cameras rolling. This small-town diner had become the center of something much bigger than anyone had expected. Thomas moved through the crowd in a daze. A woman handed him an envelope. From the Midwest Truckers Association, she said. We heard what you did. This is a donation to help with your expenses. He opened it. Inside was a check that made his knees weak. More money than he made in 6 months. I can't, he tried to say, but the woman was already gone. Disappearing back into the crowd. Rachel found him and took his hands in hers. You kept saying yesterday that you were just doing what anyone would do. But that's not true, Thomas. Not everyone would have done what you did. You saw people in need, and you helped them. No hesitation. No judgment. Just pure kindness. You reminded us, Luis added, appearing beside Rachel, that there's still good in this world. In a time when everyone seemed so divided, so angry at each other, you showed us that kindness is still alive. The news reporter approached, asking if Thomas would do an interview. He agreed, still feeling like he was in a dream. He told the story simply, honestly. About the storm, about the truckers, about just trying to do the right thing. And now look, the reporter said, gesturing at the scene around them. Over 100 truckers have shown up to thank you. What does this mean to you? Thomas looked at the faces around him, young and old, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, men and women, from all walks of life, all parts of the country, united by the road, by their work, and now by this shared moment of gratitude. It means, Thomas said slowly, choosing his words carefully, that kindness multiplies. You do something good for one person, and they do something good for someone else. And it spreads like ripples in a pond. These folks didn't have to come here today. But they did because they understand something important. We're all in this together. The interview aired that evening on the local news. By the next morning, it had gone national. By the afternoon, it was international. The story of the diner owner and the truckers touched something deep in people. In a world that felt increasingly cold and divided, here was a story of warmth and unity. Letters started arriving at the diner. People from all over the country sending donations, sending thanks, sending love. A family from Maine sent a handmade quilt for Thomas. A school in Texas sent drawings from all the kids, thanking him for being a hero. I'm not a hero, Thomas kept saying. I just made some coffee and eggs. But Robert, who'd started stopping by every week on his route, would shake his head. You did more than that, my friend. You showed us what we're supposed to be. You showed us how to be human. The Crossroads Diner became famous. Truckers went out of their way to stop there, just to shake Thomas's hand, to eat at the place where kindness had sparked something beautiful. Business boomed. Thomas had to hire more staff. He gave jobs to people in town who needed them, paying fair wages, treating everyone with the same kindness he'd shown those 10 truckers on that snowy night. Years later, the diner would still be packed every day, and on the wall behind the counter, Thomas hung a photograph. It showed that morning when the convoy arrived. Dozens of trucks, hundreds of people, all gathered together, and in the center of it all stood Thomas, grinning from ear to ear, surrounded by the family he'd never expected to have. The family built not on blood, but on something stronger. Built on kindness, on compassion, on the simple act of opening a door to strangers and saying, "Come in. You're safe here." Because in the end, that's all any of us really want. To know that we're safe, that we're cared for, that we matter. And Thomas had shown 10 people that they mattered. And they'd shown him that he mattered too. That's how kindness works. It echoes, it multiplies, it changes the world, one cup of coffee at a time.